Welcome, everyone. We have made it to the last two episodes of Hulu's miniseries Mike, entitled Episode 7 Cannibal and Episode 8 Phoenix. It's been a long ride. We're coming off kind of the emotional roller coaster, which was the last two episodes, which dealt with the rape trial of Desiree Washington and also Mike's conversion to Islam while in prison and also getting out of prison and deciding what to do with his life. So, the seriousness that we got with the last two episodes is pretty much out the window now. Now we're back to kind of the fast-paced, almost music video type style of narrative that we saw in the first couple episodes. So for some people, that might be a welcome change back after the controversy with the rape episode. For other people, it might be a little bit too jarring to deal with. For me, it was kind of a mixed bag. You can kind of tell that time was of the essence now. So they were running through a lot of things, which I felt could have been more impactful if they spent a little bit more time on certain subjects. So let's start with episode 7, which was Cannibal, which you can tell by the name is probably going to be referencing the infamous bite fight, which was the Holyfield rematch. But I believe there's a little bit deeper meaning there. I think more so with this episode, we're dealing with Mike almost kind of eating himself, just destroying himself from the inside by not addressing his demons. But there was a very big bright spot in this episode, and that was his relationship with Monica Turner, who ended up being his wife. This is the first time in the series we've kind of seen him have a healthy relationship, at least in the beginning, with a woman. We saw what happened with Robin. We saw what happened with Desiree. We saw all the just random sexual encounters he had. But with Monica, it was different. She established her boundaries early on. You got like a traditional courtship, so to speak. He respected her. He did not try and push her to do anything. And it was very sweet and tender to kind of see that contrast with him as opposed to what we saw before he went into prison. So what that ended up doing is Monica was there for him and she kind of, I won't say she forced him, but she showed him the importance of not being a victim. She at various points in his comeback, she told him that you're in control of everything. If you want to fight now, immediately, we can do that. If you want to take your time, we can do that. You're not beholden to the fans. You're not beholden to Don King. And even me, I'm here and I love you, but I want the best for you, and you need to decide what that is, and I'll support you. So this is the first time we're seeing somebody like that in Mike's life, even since like what maybe Cuss, and even Cuss, had his ulterior motives with wanting Tyson to be the youngest heavyweight champion. With Monica, there was like no type of ulterior motive. She was really there to help Mike be the best person he can be. So they ended up getting married. They have two kids. This is when the problems kind of start because obviously when you're wed to somebody, you pick up all their habits, all of their best and all of their worst. So even with the two kids that they have, at the wedding ceremony, you hear Mike say in the narrative that she married me and she married my demons. So we're seeing him dealing with drug addiction. He's having bad nightmares where he's waking up in the middle of the night screaming. And she's telling him that, Mike, you gotta get it together. I'm here for you, but I can't keep going through this. And as quickly as Monica appears, Mike tells her that, or tells us that she slowly starts drifting away because he moves away from her. And, she says, I love you. I know everything, the self-destructive behavior, but there's only so much I can do. So with Tyson out of the picture, who is Mike going to lean on? And then of course Don King is here in the picture, and he wants Mike back in the ring, of course. That is his gravy train. That's the way he makes his money. So what they imply here is that Mike got into the ring too quickly in the Holyfield fights. That's what they imply that, and Mike says it himself, he says he beat himself and he didn't prepare right. He says even for the rematch, he only had 2 months where he was clean and off drugs before he got in the ring with Holyfield. And this is where I feel like the producers could have taken uh, a little bit more information from the historical record, so to speak, and not just from Mike's perspective, because him and Holyfield have a very long history, even back in the the Olympic trials is when they first met. There was a little bit of rivalry there. And Holyfield has always maintained the reason why he's had so much success with Tyson in the ring is because he was never intimidated by him. And there's a story that goes back to their first encounter where Mike was trying to kind of bully him, I think off of a pool game. And when Holyfield stood up to him, Mike kind of backed off a little bit. So I think little glimpses of that into their past could have made it a little bit more impactful. We don't really get any statements from Holyfield. It's just you see them in the ring and you see them fighting. So you really don't get the impact of the importance of that battle or how much of a monumental upset that first matchup was. And it pretty much solidified Holyfield's legacy as a legendary heavyweight, beating Tyson. Because a lot of you might not remember going into 1996, people thought, feared for Holyfield's life. They thought Tyson was going to absolutely murder him. And it's one of the best, probably heavyweight performances of the last, 25, 30 years that Holyfield delivered in knocking out Tyson in the 11th round. So we don't even get to see any glimpses of that. We only see Mike in the locker room afterward stating that he didn't remember anything from the headbutts and that he didn't even realize he lost his title. So I really think they should have showed a little bit more of that, kind of like how they showed everything with the Buster Douglas upset. I feel like they really should have dug into that deeper to show how monumental that moment was and how it impacted Tyson's life. Now, going into the rematch, they stick with the headbutting narrative that, that was the reason why Tyson got so infuriated. You see some of his post-fight interviews, his immediate one where he claimed that his kids are going to be afraid of him now. This is my career. He was dirty, so I had to retaliate. All that you can find on YouTube. So they took that verbatim from the post-fight interviews after the second fight. They talk a lot about him being ridiculed in the media, people hating him, saying he's an animal now. And I thought this was a good portion that they put in there because this fight really ended Tyson's career as like a legitimate heavyweight contender at that point. He was trying to regain the title after losing the unified titles to Holyfield, but losing in that manner and being suspended for a year, he was never the same after that. That was kind of like the last glimpse of the old Tyson. And he became a sideshow after that. The fights were almost, carnival-like. There were, six or seven guys that he fought. None of them were really legit contenders outside of maybe Andrew Galata. So it was really just a circus. And outside of the ring, we're seeing now that his life was a circus as well, with all the drugs was still going on. He loses Monica. And when we get to episode 8, they're kind of jumping back and forth a little bit. So now we're kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s. Initially it starts out in 2003, when his career is winding down, but it goes back to 97 to kind of show you the fallout, more of the fallout from the bite fight. And we get a reappearance from Desiree Washington. She doesn't say anything, but the cameras are hounding her for a statement after what happened. Because now when you do something like that, they're going to look into your past and kind of create a narrative that, you've always been the animal, you've never changed. So they wanted her opinion. He's done something else. Do you feel he needs to be locked up again? And Desiree doesn't say anything, but she has a friend with her. And the friend dresses down the reporter stating that you want a statement now because he's hurt a man. But, when he hurt my friend and raped her when she was 18, none of you believed her. You called her a gold digger, said she was out for money, even though she never got any money from that situation. So why come to us now looking for a statement, And Tyson is watching this on TV and he's almost kind of speechless. I think in his mind, he's kind of realizing that I can't escape my past as much as I tried to change or believe I did change, becoming a Muslim, getting married, trying to settle down with Monica. In that brief moment where I lost my cool, all of that came tumbling down again. And I'm back to being like the black brute that everybody stereotyped me to be before I went into prison. And that kind of barreled him into a deeper depression. So now he's like really lashing out at everybody. The only kind of downside though is because it's moving so quick, some of it kind of came off almost like, I don't know, Tyler Perry level production, almost like satirical. It doesn't really hit you like it should because they're going into the Lennox fight And then, he had that rant on stage after he bit Lennox's leg. He looks so cartoonish when he's tussling with Lennox. He rears back his head like almost like a cackle and then bites him. It's really over the top and it looks really, really silly. And some people that might work for, but I'm looking at this like, come on now, is this about to become a comedy? And then he has, the infamous, I'm sure you all heard it, the I'll F you till you love me, that, almost like the prison type of rant that he was going on with the reporter. That went a little too quick. I don't think Trevante really got a chance to kind of dig into it like he should have, because if you see the real clip, Tyson was completely like manic. And this one, Trevante was kind of playing it a little too cool, so it didn't hit you like I think it should have, the absurdity of Tyson going on a rant like that. So that one didn't work for me too much. But once we get out of that and we get the scenes with him and Don King, I thought those were pretty effective because he's still angry at Don because he knows Don is not good for him. But anytime he's on the borderline of getting rid of him, Don knows exactly what to do to reel him back in. Master manipulator. Tyson's about to fire me. Here's $2 million in unmarked cash. And that's you know, nothing compared to the money he was making off of Tyson, because we realized later on that Tyson had made $300 million over the course of his career, and all that money is surprisingly gone. So Tyson is upset. He's trying to get back at Don, but Don, has bodyguards now, and now he can't see him to find out where his money is. There's a really funny scene where they try and reconcile when Tyson comes to Florida. Don picks him up in the car, and then in the middle of the ride, Tyson starts choking him from the back seat, and then they pull over on the highway, and they're literally running around the car trying to keep away from each other. Really ridiculous, over the top moment. One of the other downsides I feel is that because we're moving so quickly, you're getting characters that get introduced without much backstory, and then they're kind of pulled away again. They're there for a second, and then they're gone. You have one guy that was helping Tyson train, that was like his hype man from the hood. He kind of jumps in for a second and then he's gone, even before you get to the Lennox match. He's almost like there leading up to the Holyfield fights, and then he's gone. And then you have Jackie, who was a close friend of Tyson's, and she accompanies him on the Florida trip to meet Don King. She's there for a second, and then they have the dust up outside the car, and then she's gone again. And this is a person that seems to be one of the few women in Tyson's life that really cares for him, but she's only there for like a split second. I thought it would have been really effective to see how she was kind of keeping his head above water with the bankruptcy and everything else he had going on in his life, particularly after he broke up with Monica. But a woman that does get a lot of good screen time is Keke. And Keke is from Philly. Anybody that wants to dig into it, it kind of touched on it a little bit, but I really didn't think they gave you the full scope of her family. Her family was in the streets. Her family, I believe, has ties with the Philly Black Mafia and the Muslims out there. They touched on that a little bit, but really didn't go in depth about how deep that was. So, but we do know that she's street smart and that she is not intimidated by Tyson whatsoever. We have another kind of good courtship, kind of like how he was having with Monica, and on the downside, these were going on at the same time, so he had basically Keke on the side. But what makes her so special is that after everybody was gone, after the money was gone, after Monica was gone, after his career was over, he had some very bad defeats towards the end with McBride and also Danny Williams. We got glimpses of those. While he's there in his squalor, just wasting away, there's Keke. And she came out there on her own. When she couldn't get him on the phone, she's like, I'm here to check on you, make sure you're doing good. And she basically nursed him back to health. And when I say health, I'm meaning mental health, kind of getting his mind right. And during the course of this, Keke gets pregnant, has a baby, and while Tyson is still laying in bed, because the baby didn't really change him completely. He's still doing drugs, still doing coke. She has like a real sit down with him, like, look, where are we going to go from here? I'm here and I love you, but you need to get back to the Mike that I know you can be. And just like that, he makes the decision looking at her like, I'm not doing coke anymore. And hands it to her. She throws it away. And then from that moment on, he's been living to try and embrace self-love and not self-loathing, and realizing that, even with my career is over, when I went into the ring, I was going in there to hurt and to confront people. But outside of the ring, I'm learning how to confront with love and with understanding. And he's learning how to finally put that warrior spirit to a different type of use. And they touch on the importance of therapy with him. He had so much built up anger to his mother, but the therapist also pointed out that, your mother was damaged, she was abused, and she did the best that she could. But the bigger detriment to you over the course of your life have been the fathers in your life. And she put an emphasis on plural, not just meaning one father figure, but the many father figures that you try to get in your life, with Don and with Cuss, and all of them put things on you that you weren't ready to process yet. Cuss was drilling in you that you needed to be a monster and intimidate at 14 years old. That's not what you needed at that point. You needed someone to guide you and to, help you just be able to understand what it meant to be a young man, not to make you a weapon. And then, of course, we know what the relationship was with Don. So the therapist was kind of the beginning of opening his mind up that you can be more than this. So you don't have to continually loathe yourself and end up eventually destroying yourself. There is more out there for you. With all the faults that you have, being a convicted rapist, the issues with Holyfield in the ring that you had, all those type of embarrassments. Yes, those are aspects of you and what you went through, but they don't define you. And you can decide every day that you wake up who you're going to be going forward and what you want to accomplish. And that was like a freeing piece for him to kind of realize that I can determine my own destiny. And it's left open-ended because, of course, there's still a lot of life to live, but we finally see Mike making peace with himself as the episode ends. And we also touch on, unfortunately, the tragic passing of his young daughter, Exodus. They touch on that a little bit as kind of helping to push him to eventually finding that peace and moving forward in life. He makes a statement that we're not one thing. We're not defined completely by our mistakes or even by our triumphs. All of that mixes together to define who we are as people. And that concludes it. So very fast paced. These were kind of, I would say, the more weaker of the episodes. I think because they were really constrained with time, but Trevante still delivered an excellent performance. I know there's been a lot of critique on social media about the makeup in particular when he's the older Mike Tyson, where they put the darker makeup on him and everything. But I think overall he did a phenomenal job, particularly with the younger Tyson, older Tyson. I don't have any really complaints about his performance. I do wish they would have did a little bit more or put a little bit more attention on his rivals. The guys that they selected for Holyfield and Lennox Lewis, you couldn't help but laugh because obviously both are bigger than Tyson as far as height wise. But the way it played out in the ring, it was kind of hard to imagine these depictions of the fighters being able to handle Trevante Tyson because he's built like a tank. But we know anybody who's watched boxing, Holyfield and Lennox are very big men themselves and both tower over Tyson height wise, but you didn't get that impression watching them in the ring. It's almost kind of looking like, why can't Tyson handle this Holyfield guy if you're not really, knowing much about boxing? Because the Holyfield actor was nowhere near as built as Trevante, and the Lennox actor had the height, but really didn't have the complete physical build of Lennox either. So it really didn't kind of hit home why both of them were able to handle Tyson in the ring the way they did and score knockouts. So I wish they would have paid a little bit more attention to that. And also, I mentioned earlier about Holyfield and Tyson having a rivalry when they were younger. You can also say the same about Lennox Lewis. He sparred Tyson while he was under Cuss's camp years ago when they were teenagers. And Cuss at the time, what they say is that he said eventually these two were going to fight for the heavyweight title at some point. He saw the greatness in both of them. That would have been a very nice touch if they put that in there. But they had time constraints. It was either Lennox or Keke, and I think they kind of wanted to focus on Keke kind of being there for Tyson's spiritual and mental rebirth. So I thought this was a really good series. I'm really impressed with Trevante's performance. I know Tyson, of course, is not going to be is not happy with the series. So I think eventually we're going to get the one that he endorses with Jamie Foxx. I know that's been in the works for it might be close to a decade now. They've been talking about this, but that is to me is going to be the big one because we know Tyson, his life really deserves a very intricate 2.5, 3 hour look. And I feel like you can only do that through like a movie. As good as this was and as entertaining as this was, when you're having these rapid fire 30-minute episodes, there's so much that you have to cut. But I feel like they've kind of touched on as much as they could during this series. And I hope this kind of opens the door for more biopics of this case, particularly people that are polarizing. Um, even to this day, if you look at the comments of my previous video, you have people that were very much defending Tyson, that, Desiree lied. You have other people saying that he's a rapist, and I'm convinced now that I watched this episode. So I do think they really tried to show both sides of the equation, or all the sides of the equation when it comes to Tyson's life, and to kind of show you that, he wasn't just a victim of his circumstances, but he was somebody that, through it all, through the ups and the downs, is a survivor, and that there's still redemption in a sense, no matter how far you've fallen, whether you've been to prison, whatever it might be, the fact that he's able to be out and, be as successful as he is now is really a miracle. Because if you go back and, look at a lot of videos from during his prison stint or right after he got out, or particularly after the biting incident, you had a lot of people claiming that, Tyson was going to be dead within 5 to 10 years, that he was just going to completely self-destruct and be a tragic story. So the fact that he's still here and thriving says something about the spirit that he has within him and the support system that he had around him, particularly with these women like Monica and Keke. So that concludes the series. Let me know what you guys think. Did you have any problems with the pacing? Were you satisfied about how they wrapped it up? Do you have the similar complaints that I had about things moving too fast? Let me know. I appreciate you guys sticking with me for the entire 8 episodes. Just to let you know, anybody that's a House of the Dragon fan on HBO, I am recapping that series weekly. And those episode recaps will be dropping every Monday afternoon. I'm looking for a couple other series to kind of tap into, especially with Halloween going on. My site, Beats Boxing Mayhem, we cover a lot of horror and a lot of horror festivals. So be on the lookout for some horror recaps as well. So thank you for your time, everyone, and have a good rest of your week.